Tom lived on the edge of a quiet farming town. His small property had been in his family for generations. It was not large, but it was enough. A red barn sat at the center of the land, its wooden walls weathered but strong, and its wide door always ready for tractors, wagons, or deliveries. Tom loved that barn. It was the heart of his farm. Inside it stored hay, tools, and memories. Outside, his field stretched for acres full of green grass, wildflowers, and the occasional grazing cow. Life was simple, quiet, and peaceful. Tom had never minded neighbors. In fact, he enjoyed waving to people as they passed by. Most of the town was polite and friendly. People knew him as the man who could fix almost anything with his hands. From broken fences to old tractors, he could bring life back to almost anything. He liked his routine. Wake up early, work hard, eat dinner, and watch the sun set over the fields. That was all he needed. But one morning, his peaceful life began to change. A new neighbor had moved in. Tom noticed the moving trucks first. They came on a Monday and stayed all week, unloading boxes, furniture, and strange objects that didn't belong on a farm. The new neighbor, Linda, had a different kind of presence. She wore expensive clothes that seemed out of place among the dusty tractors. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she moved quickly, checking every corner of the property. On Saturday, she arrived in style. Out of nowhere, a silver Bentley gleamed on the edge of Tom's property. The car was polished until it reflected the sky. It looked expensive, new, and far too delicate for a farming town. Tom watched it from the barn, wiping sweat from his forehead. He had just finished repairing a broken fence, and now his eyes were drawn to the sparkling car, like it had a strange power over the sun itself. He tried to be polite. He waved when Linda stepped out of her car. She waved back, but not in a friendly way. Her smile was sharp, almost like a warning. Tom's stomach tightened. He had learned over the years that not everyone who smiled at you meant well. Linda introduced herself as the head of the local HOA, or Homeowners Association. Tom had heard of the HOA, of course. It was a small group of people who made rules for the town. Some rules made sense, like keeping trash out of the streets. Others were strange, like what color people could paint their houses. Tom didn't mind the rules too much. He liked order. But Linda's way was different. She didn't just enforce rules. She wanted to control everything, including how people lived their lives. From the beginning, she complained about Tom's barn. "That door's too wide," she said, frowning. "And that tractor is too noisy. It doesn't belong here." Tom nodded politely. He had heard her complaints before, and he knew arguing would do no good. Linda always seemed to win arguments simply by being loud or standing in the right place. The first week passed quietly. Tom continued his work, repairing fences, feeding animals, and fixing machinery. He tried to ignore Linda as best as he could. But then came the morning he would never forget. It started like any other Saturday. The sun rose slowly over the hills and the birds chirped softly in the trees. Tom woke up early, put on his worn overalls, and prepared to load hay into the barn. The smell of fresh hay filled his nose as he walked across the yard, and he smiled. This was his life, simple but honest. Then he stopped. He froze as he looked at the barn. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Parked directly in front of the barn door was Linda's Bentley. The car blocked the entire entrance. Its polished hood reflected the sunlight so brightly that Tom had to squint. The wide doors of the barn could not open with the car in front. His tractor sat inside waiting for him, useless and trapped. Tom rubbed his forehead. She didn't, he whispered to himself. But she had. Linda stepped out of her car slowly, holding a cup of coffee. She walked toward him with a smug smile, the kind of smile that made it clear she thought she was in charge of the world. "You don't need that barn today, do you?" she said. Her voice was calm but sharp. "I just needed a place to park. The Bentley must stay in the shade." Tom opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. He only stared at the car, then at the barn. She continued, "Besides, that view looks much better without your big old tractor rolling out all the time." Tom took a deep breath. He wanted to say something, to tell her that a barn door was not a suggestion, but he did not. He knew words would not work. Linda was clever with words. She could twist anything into her favor. Instead, Tom turned and walked back across the yard. He needed time to think. The tractor inside was his main tool, and now it was trapped. His barn was blocked, and the work he planned for the day could not begin. Linda watched him go, sipping her coffee as if she had won some private battle. Tom's mind, however, was already working. He knew something had to be done. She thought the Bentley was untouchable, but she had forgotten one simple truth. On a farm, the tractor always ruled. Tom went inside the barn and climbed onto his tractor. He ran his hands over the worn metal and started the engine. The sound was loud, strong, and proud. It was the sound of work, of power, of determination. He looked at the Bentley through the barn window. It shined under the morning sun, beautiful and expensive, but also fragile. He smiled to himself. This was not just a barn. This was his life, his work, and his freedom. No car, no HOA rule, and no neighbor would take that away. Linda, meanwhile, was preparing for her own plans. She had rules to enforce and her image to maintain. She did not expect resistance because in her experience most people followed her orders. But Tom was different. He drove the tractor slowly to the edge of the barn, thinking carefully. He could see every angle of the Bentley, every inch of space between it and the barn door. He planned carefully, not recklessly. This was not about anger. This was about principle. He imagined the chaos if he moved too quickly. He did not want to hurt anyone, including Linda, but he also did not want her to block his barn door again. As the tractor moved forward, the engine growled. The ground shook slightly. Birds flew from the nearby trees, startled by the noise. Tom felt the vibration under his hands. It was comforting, almost like the barn itself was telling him he was doing the right thing. Linda noticed the movement. Her eyes widened slightly. She had expected Tom to complain, maybe to argue, but not to act. The tractor was much more than a machine. It was a symbol of Tom's determination. Tom stopped a few feet from the Bentley. He looked at it carefully. The shiny car looked delicate, almost fragile in the sunlight. He shook his head. She had crossed the line, and now it was time for action. He backed the tractor slightly, then drove forward slowly, pressing gently against the car. The Bentley did not move easily. Its wheels were in the grass, and the tractor's power began to push it backward inch by inch. Linda gasped. "What are you doing?" she shouted. Tom did not answer. He kept his eyes on the barn door. Every inch the Bentley moved was a small victory. He was not reckless, but he was firm. Neighbors began to notice the commotion. They peeked from their windows and yards. Some whispered. Some shook their heads. But none intervened. They knew Tom and knew he was careful. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, the Bentley moved enough to free the barn door. Tom stopped the tractor, turned it off, and climbed down. He looked at the Bentley. It was slightly scratched and moved, but still mostly intact. The message was clear. No car, no rule, no neighbor could block his work or take away his freedom. The barn door was free and Tom's day could finally begin. Linda stood silently holding her coffee. She did not speak. She only stared. For the first time she realized that not everyone obeyed the HOA. Not everyone cared about rules over principle. Some people, like Tom, cared about their work, their land, and their independence. Tom walked into the barn, smiling to himself. He had not lost his temper, and he had not made a mistake. He had shown, quietly but clearly, that his farm was his life. The sun climbed higher in the sky. The birds returned to the trees. The tractor waited for him, ready to work. Tom climbed back on it and started his day, knowing that today, at least, peace had returned. And somewhere in the distance, the silver Bentley waited, shiny and proud, but moved just enough to remember who really ruled the farm. The morning sun had fully risen and Tom was back at work. The barn door was open, the tractor ready, and the fields calling. Yet the events of earlier that morning had left a strange energy in the air. Tom could feel it in the hum of the tractor, in the smell of hay, and in the soft breeze that moved across his property. Something told him that Linda would not stop at just blocking a barn door. Linda, meanwhile, had returned to her house. She paced her driveway like a general planning a battle. Her silver Bentley was now parked neatly to the side, though its position did not hide the subtle dents and scratches caused by Tom's tractor. She sipped her coffee and thought carefully. How could she maintain control over this stubborn farmer? Clearly, this was no ordinary neighbor. Tom had a determination that surprised her, and she had not faced that in a long time. Linda decided that rules alone were not enough. She needed strategy, persuasion, and a touch of intimidation. After all, the HOA gave her authority, but authority alone did not scare Tom. She needed a plan. Tom worked steadily in his barn, loading hay into the tractor. He worked quietly, but every so often he glanced at Linda's house. She was always watching, sometimes from her window, sometimes from the driveway. Tom's gut told him that she was thinking, plotting, and waiting for an opportunity to strike. He had faced pushy people before, but he knew Linda was different. She would not give up easily. By mid-morning, he had finished preparing the tractor. It was loaded with hay, ready to move, ready to work, and ready to teach anyone a lesson about respecting boundaries. Tom wiped sweat from his forehead and looked toward Linda's property. He could see her pacing again, her sharp eyes scanning the land, as if she were measuring every inch of his farm for flaws. Tom shook his head and muttered, "This is not going to be simple." But he did not let it worry him. He had a plan of his own. That afternoon, Linda decided to approach him. She walked across the grass toward the barn, her shoes leaving small impressions in the dirt. Tom saw her coming and paused his work. She stopped a few feet away from the tractor and gave him a smile that tried to look friendly, but her eyes were sharp. "Tom," she said, voice sweet but firm, "I think we need to discuss your tractor. It's loud. It disturbs the neighborhood. Maybe you should consider using it less often." Tom leaned on the tractor and looked at her calmly. "Linda, this tractor is how I work. It feeds my animals, it moves my hay, and it keeps the farm running. I cannot just use it less." She tilted her head. "There must be a solution. Perhaps you could work at certain hours, like early morning or late evening when people are not around." Tom shook his head. "I already start early and finish late. That's how a farm works. It's not just convenience. It's survival." Linda's brow furrowed. She was not used to being told no. Most neighbors nodded politely and followed her suggestions. Tom was different. He had principles, strength, and patience. He was calm but firm. After a moment of silence, Linda tried a different approach. "Maybe your barn could be moved, or maybe you could build another door. That way my car wouldn't be in the way again." Tom laughed softly but without amusement. "The barn is not moving. It has been here for 50 years and it will stay. The door is where it needs to be. If your car blocks it again, we'll have a problem." Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. She had not expected him to be so direct. She wanted control, but Tom did not bend. He did not argue for the sake of arguments. He argued because he believed in fairness. That strength made him unmovable. Over the next few days, tensions grew. Linda tried different tactics. She parked her Bentley in various locations near the barn, hoping to intimidate Tom. She left notes on his door reminding him of HOA rules about property appearance and neighbor courtesy, but Tom ignored the notes. He focused on his farm, on his work, and on protecting what was his. One morning, as Tom prepared to take the tractor out for fieldwork, he noticed something strange. Linda had planted bright flowers along the edge of her driveway, right where the tractor usually turned to leave the barn. The flowers were beautiful, carefully arranged, and obviously meant to make maneuvering the tractor difficult. Tom smiled quietly to himself. She was clever. She was trying to control his movement without touching him directly, but he was clever too. He knew every inch of his land, every path, every stone, every rut in the ground. He had worked here for years. He could move the tractor through a maze of obstacles if he needed to. He started the tractor and drove carefully toward the edge of the barn. The flowers glistened in the morning sun. He moved slowly, brushing some leaves aside without damaging them. Linda watched from her window, surprised at how gently he handled the situation. He was not reckless. He was precise. By noon, Tom had finished his work in the fields. The tractor had done its job perfectly. The hay was moved, the animals fed, and the land prepared for the next day. But as he returned to the barn, he noticed something more troubling. Linda had placed signs near the barn. They were small, polite signs, but they carried a clear message: no tractors beyond this point, and please respect property lines. She had even asked the HOA to inspect his property for violations. Tom sighed. She was escalating. She was no longer simply blocking the barn. She was trying to create rules that would make it impossible for him to work. This was not about a car anymore. It was about control. That evening, Tom went to the barn and sat on the tractor. The sun was setting, casting orange and pink hues over the fields. He looked toward Linda's house. She was standing in the yard, seemingly enjoying the sunset as well. Tom felt a mix of frustration and determination. He would not give in. He could not. The next morning, Tom had an idea. He would teach Linda a lesson. but not with anger or aggression. He would show her, through action, why respect mattered more than rules. He spent the day preparing. He cleaned the tractor, checked every part, and tested its engine. Every lever, every wheel, every function had to be perfect. By late afternoon, he was ready. Linda had returned home, parking her Bentley near the edge of her driveway. Tom drove the tractor slowly toward the barn door, careful to avoid any flower beds she had planted. He approached with patience, as if the tractor itself understood the importance of the moment. Linda came out to watch. Her hands were on her hips, her face showing surprise and curiosity. She did not expect him to move at all, yet here he was, driving calmly and confidently. Tom stopped just a few feet from the Bentley and looked at it. The car was shiny, polished, and proud, but it was not strong. The tractor, powerful and steady, waited for him to make the next move. With careful precision, Tom nudged the Bentley slightly. It moved just enough to allow the barn door to open fully. The tractor passed through smoothly without a scratch on either vehicle. Linda gasped. "Tom," she exclaimed, "you cannot just do that." He smiled faintly. "I didn't break anything. I just showed you the path forward. Respect is more important than blocking doors or planting flowers. We can coexist, but only if we understand each other." Linda's expression changed. For the first time, she looked uncertain. She had faced rules, authority, and her own confidence, but she had never faced someone who refused to bend. Tom was not angry. He was steady, firm, and fair. That balance unsettled her. Over the next week, Linda's behavior shifted slightly. She no longer blocked the barn door with her Bentley. She planted flowers carefully, but not in the path of the tractor. She left notes, but they became polite suggestions rather than demands. Tom continued his work, the tractor humming steadily across the fields, moving hay, water, and feed without interruption. Neighbors began to notice the change. They whispered about the farmer and the HOA leader. Some admired Tom's quiet strength. Others wondered if Linda had finally learned her lesson. One afternoon, as Tom worked in the barn, he looked at the fields stretching into the distance. The sun warmed his back, the animals moved about calmly, and the tractor stood ready. He realized something important. This battle was not about a car, a barn, or flowers. It was about principles, fairness, and standing firm without anger. Linda, watching from her window, thought the same thing in her own way. She may not admit it, but she had learned that day that controlling people through rules alone was not enough. Sometimes respect, understanding, and a bit of humility were more powerful than authority. Tom returned the tractor to its place in the barn that evening. He cleaned it, checked it, and stepped back to admire his land. He felt calm, satisfied, and ready for whatever came next. The battle was far from over, but the first round had been won, and somewhere in the distance the Bentley waited. Shiny, polished, and proud, but now it knew that on this farm, nothing could block the path of hard work, patience, and determination. The sun rose over Tom's farm with a soft glow, casting light on the fields and the red barn that stood proudly at the center. Tom was already up, walking toward the barn, his boots crunching in the early morning frost. The tractor waited for him inside, gleaming under the soft light that streamed through the barn windows. After the recent events with Linda, he felt a quiet sense of confidence. The Bentley incident had shown him that patience, skill, and careful action could resolve problems without unnecessary conflict, but the peace was fragile. Linda, having realized that brute authority alone would not sway Tom, began planning her next move. She wanted to assert control over the neighborhood, and Tom was the most stubborn obstacle she had encountered. She spent the morning studying his property from her window, her eyes tracing the edges of the barn, the fields, and the tractor paths. Her plan was simple: find a way to challenge him without breaking the rules and regain her sense of dominance. By mid-morning, Linda was on her way to the barn again. She wore a smart jacket and carried a clipboard, the kind of professional appearance meant to impress and intimidate at the same time. She marched across the yard with purpose, the Bentley parked neatly at her driveway. Tom, busy loading hay onto the tractor, noticed her approach but did not look up. He had learned that acknowledging her presence too much could lead to unnecessary confrontation. Instead, he continued working, the rhythm of stacking hay bales steady and satisfying. "Good morning, Tom," Linda called out as she neared. Her tone was pleasant but firm. "I think we need to talk about your tractor paths. Some of your work is very close to my property line." It could cause problems. Tom wiped sweat from his brow and stood leaning on the hay bale he had just stacked. Linda, the tractor stays on my property. I have never crossed the line. It is where it should be. She nodded, pretending to consider his words, but her eyes remained sharp. I understand, but there are rules about noise and dust. Neighbors have mentioned it. Perhaps you could adjust your routes to minimize disturbance. Tom took a deep breath. He had expected this. She was trying a new approach, rules and complaints rather than physical obstruction. I follow the rules, he said calmly. The tractor only moves on my land. The dust and noise are part of farming. They cannot be avoided completely. Linda's lips pressed together. She realized that arguing further would only show weakness. She needed a more subtle strategy. Instead of direct confrontation, she decided to appeal to appearances. If she could make Tom's barn and tractor seem unsightly or out of place, she could manipulate perception and perhaps gain support from the HOA and neighbors. The next few days were challenging for Tom. Linda arranged for small inspections and visits from HOA members. They measured distances, checked property boundaries, and made notes about the appearance of the barn. Tom watched politely but did not react. He knew the barn was functional and beautiful in its own way. Its weathered wood told a story of decades of work, care, and history. He was proud of it, and nothing Linda could say would change that. One afternoon, Tom noticed something different. A group of people, clearly HOA members, were standing near the edge of his property, clipboard in hand, taking notes. Linda was with them, pointing to different areas of his land and explaining something in a serious tone. Tom approached them calmly, stopping a few feet away. "Can I help you?" he asked politely. One of the HOA members, a tall man with glasses, looked up. "We are inspecting your property for compliance," he said. "There have been complaints about tractor paths and noise." Tom nodded. "Everything is within my property. The tractor stays on my land. I do my work carefully." Linda stepped forward. "We just want to ensure everyone follows the rules," she said. Her voice was controlled, professional, but Tom noticed a slight tension in her posture. She was pushing, but she knew he would not be intimidated by inspections or complaints. After the group left, Tom returned to the barn and climbed onto his tractor. He felt a mix of frustration and determination. Linda's tactics were clever, but they were also predictable. He had learned to anticipate her moves. She wanted control, but he would not give it. The following week, Linda escalated further. She began arranging obstacles on her side of the property that made maneuvering the tractor more difficult. Small flower beds, decorative rocks, and garden fences appeared in places that forced Tom to take longer routes. Each addition was subtle enough not to break any rules but designed to test his patience. Tom, however, adapted easily. He studied each obstacle and adjusted his tractor routes carefully. He did not damage her property. He did not complain. He simply worked efficiently, proving that his focus and skill were stronger than any minor challenge she could create. One afternoon, Linda decided to observe him closely. She stood near her driveway with binoculars, noting how he maneuvered the tractor around the new obstacles. Tom moved with precision, avoiding flowers and rocks, completing his tasks faster than she expected. She could not hide her surprise. By evening, Tom returned the tractor to the barn and stepped back to admire his work. He felt a quiet satisfaction. He had not lost time, he had not damaged her property, and he had shown that persistence, skill, and careful planning could overcome obstacles. Linda, meanwhile, was thinking of her next move. She realized that she could not control Tom through force, obstruction, or complaints alone. He was clever, patient, and confident. She would need to think carefully. Perhaps she could appeal to the community or find a creative solution that maintained her influence without direct confrontation. The tension between them became a sort of unspoken battle. Every day, Tom worked his fields and maintained the barn. Every day, Linda found ways to assert her presence. But slowly, a new understanding began to form. She noticed his dedication, his respect for the land, and his skill with the tractor. She could see that he was not reckless or careless. He was disciplined and committed. One morning, Tom was surprised to see Linda approaching the barn with a different expression. She was not smiling, nor was she frowning. Her face was neutral, almost contemplative. "Tom," she said quietly, "I've been thinking, maybe we can find a way to coexist. I understand that you need your tractor and your barn. I just want to make sure the neighborhood stays orderly." Tom looked at her carefully. He could see the change in her approach. It was still cautious but less aggressive. "Linda," he said, "I want to work peacefully. I respect my neighbors, and I hope they respect me. The tractor is necessary for my work. The barn is necessary for my farm. I can work with you if you accept that." Linda nodded slowly. "I think I can do that. We just need to communicate and avoid misunderstandings." Over the next few days, their interactions became less tense. Linda still observed, still planned, but her actions were less disruptive. She no longer parked the Bentley near the barn or arranged obstacles in his path. Tom continued his work, moving hay, feeding animals, and preparing fields. Neighbors began to notice the shift. They commented on how the two of them, once in conflict, seemed to be finding a balance. Some whispered that Tom had taught Linda an important lesson about respect and patience. Others wondered if Linda had finally realized that control was not as important as understanding. One evening, Tom sat on the tractor after a long day of work. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He looked across his fields, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. The barn stood proudly, the tractor rested in its place, and the land was ready for the next day. Linda watched from her window, her expression thoughtful. She had not won through authority alone, but she had learned something valuable about persistence, patience, and compromise. Tom had shown her that strength came not from rules but from skill, integrity, and quiet determination. The tension had not completely disappeared. There would still be challenges, misunderstandings, and disagreements. But for the first time, there was a sense of balance. Tom could work freely, and Linda could maintain her role in the HOA without conflict. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Tom returned to the house, feeling satisfied. He knew that tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, and possibly new encounters with Linda. But he was ready. The tractor, the barn, and his determination were all he needed. And somewhere in the distance, the Bentley waited, shiny and proud, but no longer a symbol of obstruction. It was a reminder that patience, skill, and respect could overcome even the most stubborn attempts at control. The next morning, Tom woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the barn windows. The air was crisp, the kind that filled the lungs with freshness and reminded him of the simplicity and beauty of farm life. His barn doors were wide open, the tractor rested ready for work, and the fields awaited the morning's tasks. Tom had learned a lot from his recent encounters with Linda. Her methods were becoming more subtle, more strategic, and more clever. She no longer relied on blunt obstruction. She was calculating, patient, and determined to assert control in a way that would seem lawful and reasonable to the HOA and neighbors. Tom understood this, and he prepared himself mentally for whatever clever plan she would come up with next. By mid-morning, Linda made her move. She drove her silver Bentley carefully down her driveway and parked it near the edge of the property. But this time it was not to block the barn. Instead, she arranged the car in decorative cones around it, to create a narrow path for the tractor to maneuver through. From her perspective, it was a challenge, a small test of skill, and a demonstration of subtle power. From Tom's perspective, it was another minor obstacle, one that could be handled with patience and precision. Tom climbed onto his tractor and inspected the new arrangement. The path was tight, forcing careful steering. Flowers and small rocks were placed in ways that would punish any miscalculation. Tom studied it for a few minutes, mapping the route in his mind. His hands rested on the controls, steady and calm. Linda watched from her driveway, confident that she had found a way to assert herself without breaking any HOA rules. She thought she could intimidate Tom by testing his skill and patience. "Good morning, Tom," she called with a polite but calculating tone. "I hope this isn't too much trouble. I just want to make sure everything is safe and orderly." Tom looked at her calmly. "Good morning, Linda. I can handle it." "Thank you for your concern." Linda nodded, satisfied with his response. She did not know that Tom had not only handled challenges like this before, but he actually enjoyed a good test of skill. This was not a confrontation for him. It was an opportunity to demonstrate control and mastery over his own land. Slowly, Tom guided the tractor into the narrow path. He moved with care, avoiding the flowers and cones, feeling the steady hum of the engine beneath him. The tractor was an extension of himself, responding precisely to every subtle movement of his hands. He passed the first few obstacles easily, adjusting speed and angle without hesitation. Linda's confidence began to waver slightly. She had underestimated how naturally skilled Tom was with the tractor. Every obstacle she had created was bypassed smoothly, without damage and without delay. By noon, Tom had completed his route, loaded hay, and moved supplies across the fields. He returned the tractor to the barn, parked neatly and stepped down, wiping sweat from his forehead. The day was far from over, but he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had worked efficiently, respected the land, and handled Linda's challenge without conflict or damage. But Linda was not finished. That afternoon, she called a neighborhood meeting. HOA members gathered at her house and she presented her case. She spoke about property appearance, tractor paths, and potential disturbances. She made suggestions, implying that stricter rules were necessary. Tom attended the meeting, but he did not argue. He listened carefully, taking notes. He realized that Linda was trying to rally support by using the HOA as a tool. Her approach was clever, legal, and polite, but it relied on perception rather than reality. When the meeting ended, Tom approached her quietly. "Linda," he said calmly, "I understand your concerns. I also know that my work does not harm the property or the neighborhood. The tractor stays on my land and the barn is maintained. I hope we can work together without escalating this further." Linda looked at him for a moment, her eyes measuring his resolve. "I suppose you are right," she said slowly, "but I must follow the HOA guidelines. I cannot ignore rules even if I respect your work." Tom nodded. He knew she had to maintain appearances, but he also knew that her strategies were beginning to lose their effectiveness. The tractor, the barn, and his careful planning had shown that his land was not hers to control. The following morning, Tom prepared for another day of work. He checked the tractor carefully, ensuring it was in perfect condition. He loaded supplies, adjusted the engine, and tested the hydraulics. Every part was ready for action. Today, he sensed, might be the day Linda attempted her most ambitious move yet. Sure enough, by late morning, Linda made her approach. This time she had something more elaborate. She had arranged cones, decorative fences, and even small wooden barriers near the edge of her property. It was a more complex maze, one designed to challenge the tractor, test Tom's skill, and demonstrate her authority. Tom approached calmly, studying the new arrangement. He did not speak, did not panic, and did not hesitate. He had faced obstacles before, and each one had been overcome through careful observation, patience, and skill. He guided the tractor slowly into the path. The engine hummed, the tires gripped the soil, and the steering responded perfectly. He moved with precision, carefully passing the obstacles, adjusting speed and angle as needed. Linda watched from her driveway, binoculars in hand, impressed despite herself by his skill. As he reached the end of the path, Tom noticed a slight misalignment in one of the cones. He paused, adjusted carefully, and continued. The tractor moved flawlessly, completing the route without damage. Linda's expression changed from confidence to surprise. She had expected hesitation, error, or frustration. Instead, she saw skill, patience, and mastery. That afternoon, Tom returned to the barn. He parked the tractor, cleaned it, and stepped back to admire the fields. Everything was in order. The barn doors were free, the hay was in place, and the animals were fed. He felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had not only completed his work but also demonstrated that skill and patience could overcome even the most carefully laid challenges. Linda, meanwhile, realized that her tactics were no longer effective. Tom's work was efficient, respectful, and skillful. No obstacle she placed could disrupt his routine or diminish his authority over his land. She began to reconsider her approach. Perhaps control was not about obstruction or rules alone. Perhaps it required understanding, compromise, and respect. Over the next few days, Linda's behavior shifted. She still observed, still maintained appearances, but she no longer created obstacles or tried to assert dominance through indirect means. Tom continued his work, moving supplies, feeding animals, and maintaining the fields. The tractor hummed steadily across the land, a symbol of his persistence and careful planning. Neighbors noticed the change. Whispers spread through the town about the farmer who had faced the HOA leader and won, not through confrontation, but through skill, patience, and quiet determination. Some admired Tom's approach. Others learned a lesson about humility and respect. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, Tom climbed onto the tractor one last time for the day. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple. He drove slowly across the fields, feeling the steady hum of the engine, the softness of the soil, and the beauty of the land around him. Everything was calm, orderly, and perfect. Linda watched from her window. She understood finally that power did not come from obstruction, manipulation, or authority alone. Respect, understanding, and skill had their own weight. Tom had demonstrated that every obstacle could be met with patience and intelligence. The barn doors remained open. The tractor rested in the yard. And in the distance, the silver Bentley gleamed under the setting sun. No longer a tool of obstruction, but a reminder of the day when determination, skill, and patience proved stronger than arrogance. Tom returned the tractor to the barn, shut the doors, and stepped back. He felt satisfied. The battle was not completely over, but he had shown that integrity, skill, and patience were stronger than any obstacle or clever plan. Linda, standing in her driveway, realized that she had learned an important lesson about respecting boundaries, acknowledging skill, and finding balance between rules and understanding. The stage was set for the final resolution, and both knew that the future would require compromise, respect, and continued vigilance. But for now, the farm was peaceful. The barn doors were free, and Tom had proven that hard work, intelligence, and quiet determination could overcome even the most persistent challenges. The morning sun rose slowly over Tom's farm, casting long shadows across the fields. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of soil, hay, and dew. Tom walked toward the barn, his boots leaving impressions in the soft earth. The tractor rested inside, ready for another day of work. Today, however, felt different. He sensed that the tension between him and Linda, the persistent HOA neighbor, was reaching its conclusion. Linda, too, was awake early. She stood by her driveway, looking out at the farm with a mixture of curiosity and determination. The past few weeks had taught her much. Tom's patience, skill, and quiet strength had surprised her. She realized that no amount of rules, obstacles, or inspections could bend him. Still, she felt compelled to try one final time. Perhaps, she thought, a last clever move could establish authority without conflict. By mid-morning, Linda had positioned her Bentley near the edge of her property, not blocking the barn but close enough to suggest control. She had also arranged small barriers, ropes, and markers, creating a narrow challenge course near the entrance. She stood confidently, assuming that Tom would hesitate or complain. Tom climbed onto the tractor and studied the setup carefully. He could see the thought behind each barrier, each marker, and each small obstacle. Linda had put effort into this, but he was ready. He took a deep breath and smiled. The tractor was steady beneath him. He knew the land, the barn, and the paths perfectly. Skill and patience had brought him this far, and he would not falter now. "Good morning, Tom," Linda called politely. "I hope this won't interfere with your work." Tom nodded calmly. "Good morning, Linda. I will be careful. Thank you for thinking of safety." Linda's smile was faint. She watched closely, assuming that he would make a mistake. Tom guided the tractor into the course slowly, maneuvering precisely around each obstacle. The engine hummed steadily. Every turn was calculated. Every movement was smooth. The tractor seemed to move as if guided by Tom's careful attention, rather than by machinery alone. Neighbors watched from their windows and yards. Some whispered in surprise. Many had assumed that Linda's authority would eventually limit Tom's work. Yet here he was, skillfully navigating her challenge without complaint or error. By noon, Tom had completed the course, delivered supplies, and returned to the barn. Linda approached cautiously, no longer confident in her control. "Tom," she said, her voice softer now. "I see that you can handle anything I place in your path. I suppose I underestimated your skill." Tom smiled politely. "Thank you, Linda. I appreciate your concern, but the farm is my responsibility. The tractor, the barn, and the fields all require care. I cannot ignore my work." Linda paused, considering his words. For the first time, she saw his perspective clearly. His life was built around his land and his work. She realized that controlling it with rules, barriers, or parked cars was not only futile but unfair. Respect, she understood now, mattered more than authority. The next day, Linda changed her approach completely. She parked the Bentley neatly in her own driveway, leaving the barn door and tractor paths entirely clear. She removed obstacles, barriers, and decorations that could impede Tom's work. She began speaking politely, offering suggestions rather than rules and acknowledging Tom's skill and dedication. Tom noticed the change but did not let it disrupt his routine. He continued his work as usual, feeding animals, moving hay, and maintaining the fields. The tractor hummed confidently across the land. The barn doors remained open and everything operated smoothly. Neighbors noticed the shift. Some came to watch Tom work, marveling at his skill. Others spoke to Linda, noting that she had finally adjusted her behavior. The community slowly recognized that cooperation, understanding, and respect produced better results than conflict, obstruction, or control. One afternoon, Tom paused while stacking hay. He looked toward Linda's property. She waved politely from her driveway, a small but genuine gesture. Tom waved back. There was no tension, no challenge, just acknowledgement of boundaries and mutual respect. For the first time in weeks, the farm felt completely peaceful. The tractor moved efficiently across the fields and the animals settled calmly. The barn doors opened freely and Tom could work without concern. Linda, standing at the edge of her property, reflected on the events. She realized that her desire for control had blinded her to the value of cooperation. She had learned an important lesson. Respect for others' work and dedication was more powerful than any rules or obstacles she could create. Tom, meanwhile, climbed onto the tractor for his evening routine. He moved through the fields slowly, enjoying the hum of the engine and the comfort of the familiar paths. Each turn reminded him of the challenges he had overcome: the parked Bentley, the barriers, the inspections, and the clever obstacles. Each had been a test of skill, patience, and determination, and he had succeeded without conflict or destruction. As the sun set, the sky painted with warm hues, Tom returned to the barn. The tractor was cleaned and parked. The barn doors were shut, but nothing blocked them. The fields were orderly. The animals were calm. Everything was as it should be. Linda watched the sunset from her window, the Bentley parked safely in her driveway. She had no desire to block the barn again. The lessons of the past weeks were clear. Patience, skill, and respect for others' work were more powerful than authority, obstruction, or cleverness alone. The town noticed the change as well. Word spread about how the determined farmer had met challenges with patience and skill rather than anger. People admired Tom's calm approach and they respected the balance he had achieved with Linda. She had attempted control through authority, rules, and obstacles, but he had shown that persistence and integrity could overcome any challenge. In the days that followed, Tom continued his work with the tractor, feeding animals, moving hay, and maintaining the fields. Linda still observed occasionally, but now she did so respectfully, acknowledging boundaries without interference. The Bentley no longer threatened the barn door or the paths. The farm was once again a place of peace, productivity, and quiet satisfaction. One evening, Tom and Linda spoke for the first time without tension. "I understand now, Tom," she said quietly. "I see that your work is important." "I respect that," Tom nodded. "Thank you, Linda. I respect your position as well. I believe we can coexist peacefully as neighbors and community members." Linda smiled genuinely for the first time. "I think we can," she said. From that day on, there was balance. Tom's farm operated smoothly, the tractor moved freely, and the barn doors were never blocked again. Linda maintained her HOA responsibilities, but she did so with a newfound respect for those around her. The town recognized the lesson learned. Cooperation, understanding, and patience often achieved far more than obstruction or authority alone. The tractor became more than a machine. It was a symbol of persistence, skill, and calm determination. The barn stood proudly, its doors open and ready, a testament to hard work and careful planning. And the Bentley, once a symbol of obstruction, became just a car, shiny, polished, and harmless. As the sun set over the farm for the last time in this chapter, Tom parked the tractor, shut the barn doors, and looked across the fields. He felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not just for the work completed, but for the challenges overcome. The farm was peaceful. The work was done, and respect had been earned. Linda, too, felt the change. She understood now that authority alone could not control a determined and skilled neighbor. Cooperation, respect, and recognition of others' efforts were far more powerful. She returned to her house, parked the Bentley, and watched the fields quietly, acknowledging the farmer's right to work in peace. That evening, the farm rested under the soft glow of twilight. Birds settled in trees, animals found their spots for the night, and the fields were calm. Tom walked slowly across his property, feeling the satisfaction of a day well spent. He had faced challenges, obstacles, and attempts at control, and he had met each one with patience, skill, and integrity. The story of the tractor. The barn and the Bentley became a quiet legend in the neighborhood. People remembered how determination and respect could overcome obstruction, how skill and patience were stronger than force or rules, and how two very different neighbors learned to coexist peacefully. Tom returned to the barn for the night, the tractor resting safely inside. He looked out over his fields, feeling content, proud, and calm. The barn doors remained open in spirit, even if closed for the night. The challenges had been met, the obstacles overcome, and the balance restored. Linda returned to her home, the Bentley parked safely in the driveway. She had learned that respect for others' work, patience, and understanding were more powerful than any rules, obstacles, or authority. She had also learned to appreciate Tom's dedication and skill, and in time she would become a neighbor who supported rather than obstructed. The farm slept under the stars, peaceful and orderly. The tractor, the barn, and the field stood as symbols of patience, determination, and respect. And both Tom and Linda knew that coexistence, understanding, and cooperation were the true victories of the story.